My name is Dr. Bob RYDER, consultant diabetologist from Birmingham in the United Kingdom, presenting data on the first NHS Endobarrier service in the United Kingdom. These are my disclosures, and this is Endobarrier, a 60 centimetre impermeable sleeve implanted during a simple endoscopy procedure into the first part of the small intestine, left in for a year and then removed again in a simple endoscopy procedure, and it mimics the bypass bit of the Roux-en-Y bariatric procedure. We've implanted over 50 of these in our NHS service, and I'm presenting data today on the first 12 of these patients who've reached 6 months after the endobarrier was removed. These were their baseline characteristics, and I point out in particular the long duration of diabetes, median of 17 years, and that 75% were taking insulin. So these patients have had diabetes for many years, many treatments have been tried, and yet they remain overweight with poor glycaemic control. This is what happened to them after a year of endobarrier treatment, and you can see the weight fell by 17.6 kilograms, nearly 40 pounds. Hemoglobin A1c went down from 9.6% to 7.2%. Big drop in systolic blood pressure and in alanine aminotransferase, presumably reflecting a reduction in liver fat. A big drop in the dose of insulin you can see there, and 3 of the 9 patients were able to discontinue insulin. These are the individual plots of the patients over the 18 months, including the 6 months after the endobarrier was removed, and you can see the 9 green plots represent 9 patients who sustained the improvement over the 6 months after the endobarrier was removed, and the 3 red plots are those patients who didn't, and all these 3 patients had major problems with depression. These are the same patients, and those that maintain the improvement in weight also maintain the improvement in hemoglobin A1c, whereas there were 3 patients in whom the hemoglobin A1c had a problem. This patient here did sustain a lower hemoglobin A1c, but this was due to a big increase in the insulin dose, and therefore can't be put down to anything to do with endobarrier. Looking at the means for the groups as a whole, for the hemoglobin A1c between 12 and 18 months, there wasn't a statistically significant rise, though there was an increase because of the 3 patients who deteriorated, but yet the group as a whole remained very much below the baseline hemoglobin A1c, and this also applies to the weight and BMI. The insulin dose you can see in the bottom right hand corner continued to fall, and indeed a further patient came off insulin, meaning that 4 out of the 9 patients on insulin were able to discontinue insulin. Some of these patients have now reached 24 months, a year after the endobarrier is removed, and I can show you here 3 of these. This lady here was our first patient to go from obese BMI to normal BMI, with a hemoglobin A1c dropping to 6.8%, and she sustained the improvement for the 12 months after the endobarrier was removed. This lady here was on CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure ventilation, overnight for obstructive sleep apnea, and after the 46 pounds of weight loss from endobarrier, she no longer required CPAP, as well as a big improvement in diabetes, and out to 24 months she sustained the improvement as well. This gentleman here had interstitial lung disease and required ambulatory oxygen, but after losing over 60 pounds from endobarrier, he no longer required the ambulatory oxygen, he no longer required insulin, and a year later he continues to be just as well, without problems with the requirement for ambulatory oxygen, and no longer requiring insulin. This lady here was extremely obese. She was on 260 units of insulin. She lost over 80 pounds with the endobarrier treatment. She no longer required the insulin, and this shows the number of insulin pens she was consuming in years, which is a lot of money being spent, and this shows all the other paraphernalia, the glucose tests, the pen needles, the lancing devices, the sharp bins for disposing of sharps. None of these required any more. We've established a worldwide registry for endobarrier, which is independent, and these are our conclusions, which you can read at leisure. And I point out in particular that endoscopy units are ubiquitous, and therefore our service could be readily disseminated with the registry useful for ongoing monitoring worldwide.